All right, good morning. Thank you everyone for our stress test of the new mass combat system last night. I wanted to take a moment to sort of talk through how it works since we've made that change and we sort of made it on the fly for what we did with the hive scene. Um, I think it worked well, and it's a system that we're going to keep basically. So as a reminder, right, narrative combat works as the players have a set time period to make their roles describe their actions, um, so that you are aware. While you're doing that, the ST is rolling, usually with physical dice, to be honest, the soak for the bad guys as you are typing, and like typing in a notepad of like so and so attacks but only does blah 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 damage after the soak roll. After that, the bad guys attack, doing a set period of damage, and that is where the ST posts like the round results, which will be so and so does this, so and so does that, so and so does this. The bad guy attacks. Here's what happens. Usually trying to take into account dodge rolls and difficulties to hit and so on. I'm not going to say it's perfect because the minute you have more variables than, three or four, things get missed. It happens. Um, your What you can do to make that easier when you are engaging in narrative combat, when you are in a combat scene, number one, edit your nick on Discord to indicate what difficulty it is to hit you individually. This will be really important for regular combats, not as much for mass combats. We'll cover that in a minute. Um, but that will make it easier for the ST to be like, okay, I don't have to. It's less variables to factor, basically. When you are doing your narration, as a reminder, narrate it however cool, dramatic, like you want to do. That's the whole point of doing narrative combat. But parentheses in the end, how many successes to hit, and then how much damage did you do? Realizing that if you have an NPC that's dodging, or what have you, uh, the ST will take a look at the dodge roll and how many successes you hit, and decide, did your hit miss completely, or do you only do like a percentage of the damage that you rolled, if you do hit, like with a partial hit. Um, After that, after the round results post, you'll roll your soak rolls as normal, and then we go into bonus rounds. If we have a situation where only the NPCs are taking bonus rounds, that might be part of the round results. That gets a little per ST. Okay. Unfortunately, I don't have uh, anything physical to show you on this one. The way we're doing mass combat is, instead of saying, I have 7 werewolves and I'm going to roll them individually, which is an awful lot of rolling, is that we're going to say the mob works as one. And we're going to sort of muck with the physics and the mechanics for this. The premise of this mob combat, I am pulling from my experiences in SCA warfights, where there's 300 people on a field. And one of the things that we have to stress to new fighters going into that is that it no longer matters how good or not good of a fighter you are. There's too much going on. There's too many people in every direction. Your ability to duck a shot may be great, but by doing that, you get the person next to you, hit. Your ability to duck a shot doesn't help when you don't see the shot coming because you're focused on these 3 people and you get hit from the side. Almost every time I've been knocked out of a mass melee style fight, I never even saw the shot coming. Like, it was a valid shot. We were in engagement for my SCA folks, but it was like the dude 3 people down the line with the power lunge, So the idea is, in mass combat, it is generally easier for you to hit, because wall of targets, and generally easier for you to be hit, There's just so much going on. Okay, so here's how this is going to work. Each mob unit has however many creatures are in the mob times 10 in hit points. If we have a mob of 2, 20 hit points for the mob. A mob of 3, 30 hit points for the mob. If we're dealing with particularly crunchy mobs of mortals, whatever, mobs of kittens, we might lower that, we might crank that down. The reason we chose times 10 is to provide a reasonable challenge for the characters, because really, if we're in a fight where you're being mobbed, in all likelihood, the characters have done all of their prep work, and they soak ag and dish ag and have +3 to be hit and -3 to their hits, and they've baited for bear. So as a general rule, we wanted it to be a reasonable enough challenge to not be trivial, providing some damage but not lethal damage. And finding that sweet spot between too easy and too hard is it's really hard. So we might tweak those numbers on the fly as we go. Now, the characters attack the mob as a mob. You can't target an individual mob in them because there's just too many people in the way and people are in every direction. The mob rolls its attack once. And the mob will have an attack pool. The difficulty for the mob to attack is going to be 6. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. And it rolls its damage normally. It'll have a damage pool. And bonus successes from the hit feed over into the damage pool just like yours do. But the key thing about the outgoing damage from the mob is that whatever damage is rolled, it multiplies it by the number of NPCs in the mob. So, for example, a mob of 7 werewolves rolls 4 damage. The outgoing damage from that mob is 28, 7 times 4, aggravated damage. How that damage is handled, we will talk about in a minute, because, nobody can take 28 ag. A mob of 5 hunters rolls lethal damage, right? Rolls 4 damage. So they do 20 lethal to the players. A mob of 20 kittens somehow does 1 damage. The players take 20 passion. Now, in terms of damaging the mob will roll its soak versus every attack. So as you're posting your narrative attack, indicating how many successes to hit and how much damage, the ST is rolling the soak rolls. When attacking a mob, the how many successes to hit doesn't really matter. A mob can't dodge. The only place where that matters is how much feed over dice you get. So when you're doing narrative combat versus a mob, you can literally just say, I hit for X amount of damage. And as you're doing your rolls, remember that everything after that first hit feeds over into extra damage. Mobs can't dodge. There's too many people. It is a wall of flesh. You're going to hit somebody. As the mob gets damaged, as you're doing damage to this swarm of people or monsters or whatever, the amount of hit points it will have will go down, perhaps obviously, and as such, the amount of damage it does will also go down. So if I have a mob of 3 characters, right, 3 NPCs attacking as a mob, on round 1, it does times 3 damage, whatever I roll times 3. When you do 10 points of damage to it, now it's under 20 hit points, it is only times 2. When you do 10 more points of damage to it, after soaks, etc., it's only times 1. Basically, as you diminish the mob, there are less monsters to attack you back. Okay, player side stuff. What you need to know. The base difficulty to hit a mob is 6. That is just average World of Darkness difficulty. That number can be modified by magic powers if you have something that helps you reduce your difficulty to hit. Hitting the mob, frankly, isn't the hard part, right? It is a target-rich environment. As I mentioned before, you cannot target an individual in the mob. If we have a combat where we have a mob of like melee fighters and a spellcaster unit, that spellcaster unit will be an individual character who will attack individually, dodge individually, and do all the normal combat stuff. We won't stick a caster kind of character really with any great effect, I should say, in the middle of a mob and like make you chew through the mob to get to him. Now, this is the weird part that we're sort of monkeying with the mechanics, and based on last night, I feel like this works. If we come to it later and realize something's broken, we'll fix it. The base difficulty for the mob to hit you is 6 and cannot be modified. There's people everywhere. The real question is not if somebody gets hit, but did you happen to get hit among your various targets of other characters in the fight? Now, the reason for this is, as I mentioned before, it doesn't particularly matter how good you are at dodging, how good of an individual combatant you are. If this was individual combat, as a reminder, if I have 4 NPCs attacking one character, the swarm rules in the rule books say that individual character is at a +4 to do everything, dodges, attacks, etc. And that sucks for that character, by the way, who suddenly can't dodge and like can barely hit. So it's less of a matter of how good are you at it moving versus just some random dumb luck. Did you happen to be at the wrong end of the swarm? Now, how do we factor in the benefits and the work done to make your character really awesome? If you have some kind of magical shield or whatever that increases your difficulty to be hit, I'm going to use Force's Shield just as an easy example, but there's a billion. I'm harder to be hit. Dragon's Ire, I'm wearing a physical shield, whatever. Whatever benefit you have in terms of making it harder to hit your character, you transfer that benefit to your soak roll versus the mob. So if you have a +3 to be hit, I only get hit on 9s. Now your soak difficulty, which is normally 6, gets reduced by 3. Right? The +3 over there becomes a -3 over here. Meaning it's still possible. The dice say it's improbable because 3s are easy. It's still possible for you to be hit in the swarm and to take damage from the mob. But it's unlikely, right? You're ducking around things, you're moving around things. It's unlikely you're going to take damage from it. But as opposed to sorting out individual dodge rolls versus attack rolls, etc., and the swarm effect, that's where that benefit's going to go. If you have multiple things that give you benefits towards being hit, the lowest your soak roll can ever be is a 3. The lowest difficulty is always 3. As a tangent, the reason for that is that 1s are always auto fails. We need a 2 to give you a fail but not a botch option and a success option, right? So the lowest difficulty for anything is always 3. Realize, by the way, you can't botch a soak roll. That's just World of Darkness mechanics. Lowest difficulty is always a 3. Now, what happens if you want to dodge? And I'm thinking of our werewolf characters who can split their actions really effectively and dodge with the first one and then do some attacks. Our vampires with celerity who can do the same thing or reserve a celerity action as a dodge action. Time mages, yada, 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 yada. Quicksilver, Reese, I'm looking at you. Since the mob is just a swarm of attacking creatures, when you roll your dodge, however many successes you gain on the dodge is extra dice on your soak roll versus the swarm. So as an example, I have done magic things. I have magicked myself, I have magicked my armor, and I'm dodging. Okay. The swarm does 28 damage. With the swarm damage, you volunteer for how much damage you're going to take before you roll your soak. Like, I know that I have Fortitude 2, and I can only soak 2 ag. I'm going to volunteer to take 2 and take my chances. I'm going to be a giant badass and get in the way, and I think I've got an awesome soak roll. I'm going to volunteer to take 10. Then you roll your soak roll, and you see how lucky you are. If at the end of that, there's any damage left over, the ST gets to decide where it goes. The players get first pick of like how much they're going to volunteer to take out of the massive damage being done. Anything left over, the ST gets to pick. Now, let's do our easy example here. I am in a swarm attack with Edward, whatever. I decide that of the 28 damage this swarm did, I am going to volunteer to take 5 of it, right? Somebody else can deal with the other 23. Now, because I have a forces shield, right, because it's Edward, my soak difficulties are only 3, right? If the bad guys are doing something that bump up the soak difficulty, that might change. But for the moment, let's just say my soak difficulties are only 3. Now, because magic, I can soak with my stamina. So I have a stamina of 2. I need to buy that up. Because magic, I can soak with my armor. So now I can do 5 dice. And I roll a dodge. And I get 3 successes, right? Dodge is dexterity plus athletics as a reminder. Edward has a dice pool of 6 for this. Let's say he rolls just okay. So now, I am facing a swarm. I rolled 3 successes on my dodge. I add 3 dice to my soak. So now I'm rolling 8 dice at a difficulty 3 to resist 5 damage. That's really likely. I might take 1. If I roll really badly, I'm going to take more than that. But on average rolls, you're probably okay. So, my hope is that this explains some of our decisions for last night. I don't foresee us having to use this type of mob combat often, but it lets us represent what should be a huge scale battle, a Helm's Deep kind of, Battle of 5 Armies kind of fight, without just bogging it down in roll after roll after roll after roll for the bad guys. Perhaps obviously, the bigger the swarm, the more dangerous it is, and the more damage it's going to output. As a general rule, we will use the swarm combat mechanics when there are multiple players in multiple scenes, like we did with the Hive attack, or if there are going to be more than 4 NPCs. The reason for that more than 4 part. As a reminder, the actual in-book I am being mobbed mechanics is that you get a +1 for every person in melee combat with you. But if you're only running 4, right, 4 attacks is not unreasonable, or 4 actions is not unreasonable, and when it's more than that, like, let's start clumping them up. As a closing thought, I would like to give kudos, number 1, to all of the various ST staff for their work on the Hive raid last night. An awful lot of behind-the-scenes work went into that. In specific, I would like to give some kudos to Nick, who did an awful lot of mechanics work prepping that. As Evan's narrator. And I would like to give kudos to Troy for coming up with a better system. This system is loosely adapted off of the D&D 5th Ed how to handle that mob combat. It is a much more efficient system. The original system I wrote, I have a habit of overcomplicating things. So this is a much more efficient process, and kudos to him for going, what about this? This will work better. And beyond that, you know, it's fun playing with everybody. So I'm glad you had a good time. I hope we have provided some fun. I have been messed up by a werewolf roleplay, whether that's physical damage or psychological damage, because, you know, a wall of werewolves is terrifying to everyone but other werewolves, really. And or some interesting consequences from the scene. Ponder, I'm looking at you, Mr. About to be in a quiet. So, thanks everybody, and have a great Sunday.